QuickBooks Pro Plus Desktop 2022. Bank rules, same customer, different income accounts. Get ready because we bookkeeping pros are moving up the hilltop with QuickBooks Pro Plus Desktop 2022. Here we are in our bank feed practice file, going through the setup process with the view drop-down, the open windows list on the left-hand side, company drop-down, home page in the middle, maximizing it to the gray area. Reports drop-down, company and financial, going on to that balance sheet standard. We're going to be customizing that report up top, doing a range change from 010121 to 123121. Fonts and numbers, size up to 14, okay, yes please, and okay. Reports drop down again. We're going to go down to the company and financial, profit and loss, range change from 010121 to 123121. Customizing that report with the fonts and numbers, changing the font size up to 14, okay, yes please, and okay. Reports drop down again, accounting and taxes, the trial balance with a range change, 010121 to 123121, customizing that report on the fonts and the numbers, changing the font size to 14, okay, yes please, and okay. Going to the banking drop down, we want to go on down to the bank feed center, look at the bank feed center, maximizing that to the gray area. So now we're concentrating on the rules. I'm going to close the caret on the left-hand side. We're in the checking information. We're looking at the deposit side of things, but some of these concepts can apply to the decreases as well, the check side or decreases to the accounts as well. I'm going to go to the filtering up top, and let's just take a look at the deposits. So we'll say deposits here, and I'm also going to sort it by the download as information, which will often have the information will be kind of like the customer and or vendor information, which is going to be in that description here. Going to make this a little bit wider. We're going to imagine a situation now where we have the same customer that we would like to break out to two different accounts as we enter the data into the system. So for our example here, we might have the Amazon. We might get paid from Amazon for multiple different things. We might have Amazon that we have some kind of advertising revenue or something like that versus stuff from Amazon Prime or something that we upload for courses or revenue from book sales or something that we want to differentiate. We're going to imagine here possibly that we have different locations from the same customer. And again, you can have the same kind of concept on the vendor side of things with the outflows of the payments. So then the question is, well, is there a way? Because if I put in a bank rule up top, then typically the rule is going to just be applied to, as we've seen for most of our vendors, we'll take that one vendor as the basis on which we apply the rule, basically applying everything from that vendor or that customer to one revenue account. But how can I basically split up the revenue accounts if I have the same customer and I have two different accounts that I would like to hit, possibly two different locations, or possibly use class tracking and have two different classes? That is another way that you could possibly break this out as well. So for example here, we've got the Amazon.co and Amazon.com, and we've got this payment number at the end of this one. We've got the EDI. So these are both from Amazon, but some of this added information in the downloaded as section could help us to differentiate where these are going to go, and possibly some of this added information might give us some indication as to what the payment is for, differentiating it in that way, and or give us differentiation by the location of the payments, even though it's the same customer. And then you can even look a little bit further and possibly take some information from the memo over here, which is another area that you might be able to say, maybe the memo can help me out to distinguish the payments by different locations, for example, and then try to use the memo to make your adjustments to make your adjustments too, and make your bank rules. So I'm going to turn on the class tracking. I'm going to open the caret, and we're not going to get into a lot of detail on class tracking, but just give an idea because you could set up these more complex rules based on class tracking as well. So I'm going to go to the edit drop down to the preferences, and I want to go to the accounting and then company preferences, and we want to turn on the class tracking. And this will typically be focused in on the income statement side, and it'll give us a little breakout by column where they're going to be the classes that are going to be included. this could give us a little bit more added information, although it kind of adds a little bit more detail on the data input to get that added information. So I'm going to say OK, and we'll turn on those class tracking. So just so you can see what happens there, if I go to the home page up top and I was to enter a normal kind of form, I won't enter one, but just to look at an invoice type of form to see what the difference is, we now have a class field here that we can add a class. And I'm going to imagine that we have two different locations that we would like to add a class to, and that's one way that we can break out the two locations. Another way we could break out the two locations is to simply have sub-accounts for the two locations, or have different accounts per location. So I'm going to close this back out, and then let's go back to the bank feeds. And so let's imagine that this one, we would like to make a rule for this item, and it's going to be an Amazon account that's going to go to one account versus another. So I'm going to hit the drop down. I'm going to add more detail. Let's say add more detail. And before I do that, let's close the caret up. I'm going to close the caret on the left-hand side, and then hit the drop down. And then I'm going to sort this by Amazon, and then hit the drop down. And I want to add more detail. I'm going to move this over a bit so I can see the information here. I'm going to add then a rule. So let's add a rule. And this one, I'm going to make the rule a little bit more precise. So I'm going to call this Amazon dot, and then I'm just going to call it .co, and then possibly a 2202, because that's the differentiating factor between this rule and this name down here, even though they're the same customer. Then we could say we want either all of these conditions to be met, or any of these conditions to be met. I'm going to go with the any conditions to be met. I'm going to keep the description, and so that's what we want. And I'm going to say it doesn't need to match exactly, because I'm going to make it a little bit more broad than that. I'm going to say it needs to contain, and then I just need to make it contain enough that it's going to be differentiating from the other rule. So we'll make it go to Amazon.company, the 2202, for example, and that will differentiate it from the rule that I'll make down here. This will go to a different area. Now, when you go to the payee, this is going to be the customer in this case. We could use the Amazon.com again, Amazon.company. Notice that we made two different customers. If you have two different customers, they're going to show up differently when you go to the customer center, which you might want even though they're actually the same company, because then you can see the detail, and it'll help you to kind of track the detail for one group of payments versus the other. So you have the option then here of either having one, which would just be like Amazon, or making a differentiation so that when you go into the customer center, you'll have the different customers, even though they're the same customer, but they'll be allowing you to tie out the transactions for that customer for the related item by location, is what we're imagining in this case. And then we're going to have the categorize in the account. So we're going to make it go into an account here, and then we've got our drop down for the account. I think we put these last time into the income accounts down below, and we've got the audiobook revenue, the book revenue, the sales. I'm going to say it's the video content, but I'm going to add a subcategory here. So instead of video content, I'm going to say, let's add a new account. And we're going to say this is from, let's call it location 1. And I'm going to make it a subcategory of the video content. And this needs to be an income type of account, subcategory of the video content. So now it's going to show up as a subcategory of the video content to give us that more detail. And it's going to be another account. And then if I wanted to also apply classes to it, we could do that. So I'm going to keep this here. I'm going to save this and close it. So there is that. I also want to assign that to a class. And I got to add a class. I'm just going to call it location 1. I misspelled the location 1, but that's okay. It's misspelled. That's fine. Location 1 class tracking. Let's just call it L1. That might make it a little less likely that I'll misspell it. So we'll save that one. That's a new class we're going to set up. I'm going to say quick add, and OK. We're going to save that. And so there is our rule. And let's go ahead and save it to the register. Transaction must have accounts. Do you want to assign? I'm going to say no. And I'm going to close this right now. And then if I filter this, I didn't record the transaction. I set up the rule. And then if I go to the left-hand side, now the rule has been applied on the left. So if I go over here, here's the rule that has been applied. It pulled over those two items on the left-hand side. Now note, if I wanted to change that rule, I can go up to the rules up top, and here's all of our rules. I could add the rule directly here. So notice I actually went into a transaction to create the rule, which is usually easier to do because then it'll start to populate, what you think the rule should be. But you could add the rule directly from here. And here's the rule that we added. We could edit it here if we wanted to make any changes to it. Closing this out. I'm going to say let's add this. And so hold on a second. Not this one. I'm going to say these two are checked off. Let's batch add those two. So we're going to say add and confirm. And that should pull them over to the added to the register item. Now let's open up the caret on the left-hand side, go into the trial balance. And on the trial balance, we've got our income account, and we've got this kind of subcategory you can see here with the drop down by the location. So we put it into location 1, which gives us a little bit added detail versus all this other stuff, which we just put into a general location. We didn't assign like a location 1 or 2 categorization. That's one way you could break out the locations. Another way you could break that out is with the use of class tracking. So I could hit the reports drop down up top, and let's go to the company and financial and a profit and loss by class. And then I'll change the range 01012221 to 123121. And let's customize that report, fonts and numbers. Change the font size to 14. OK. Yes, please, and OK. And so now we've got the unclassified, which I didn't assign a location to, and then this one, there's our location. So we could use class tracking, as you can see, to break out the income statement items in column by column and then have the total on the right. If you were to use class tracking to do it, you can set up the rules to go to the class tracking. You don't really need the added sub account then. We could have just put it into the same account here and then broken out by the classes. Sometimes it's useful to have the sub account as well, because then it gives you a double check that your class tracking is tying out as well, so it gives you kind of a double check. But that's another way that you can use the rules to kind of make a distinction, and you can use that class tracking when making the rules. Let's do the second one. If I go back to the bank feeds and then go back to the uncategorized, and I'm going to close the caret, and I'm going to sort here, and now let's do the other rule, and let's assume these are Amazon for location 2, and we'll add a rule here. So I'll hit the drop down, add more details, and I'm going to pull this to the right. Now also note that if you don't have enough information here to make the rule, you might then go to the memo with another line item and then use this to make the rule, possibly with this number, which would be slightly different. So that's another area you can go to make the rule. I'm going to go down and say I want to make a rule. Let's make a rule. And so we're going to say this rule is going to be Amazon.com rule. I think that's all we need. And then I'll say it needs to contain, let's say all this time. And we could have the description. And let's say it contains. And I don't need the whole thing. I just need the distinguishing factors, which is Amazon.com Incorporated, which would distinguish it. Now realize that if that wasn't enough to distinguish it, you could add another line here and say, I need you to then have both of these two things, not either or, not any, but both of them to apply to get this rule going. And then you could go to the memo line, and then you want it to basically contain, possibly, and then put the number for the memo line here. And that's another way that you can distinguish with the memo line. And then it would have to meet both of these, have this in the description, which if that's not enough to distinguish a transaction for the rules, then you can go to the memo line and add that more detail. But I don't need that here, so I'm going to close that out. And I'm going to say the payee is now Amazon.com, which is a different customer than the other customer. You could use the same customer because they're actually the same, but you might want a different customer by the different types of incomes that you are receiving to give you the detail on the customer center. And then I'm going to say this is going to go to the category of a new account. Let's make a new account up top. New account, it's going to be an income type of account, and it's going to be, we'll just call it location 2. It's going to be a sub account of the video content ad revenue. And so I'm going to save that. And I also want to make another class now, and this will be a class of location 2. Location 2 class, okay. And then we'll save it. And then I'm not going to record it because I just made the rule, so that should pull these over. The rule got pulled over to the recognized area, so they've been recognized. And I can batch add them now, hit the drop down or rise up. And I'm going to say add confirm. Add confirm, okay. Open up the caret and go down to my profit and loss. If I just do the normal profit and loss, then this is breaking out by the 2 locations with the subcategories, which is one way you can add the more detail and then collapse into just one number. That's one way, although it gets quite long if you do it that way. And the other way you could break it out is the profit and loss by class if you want to break out by like location. And so now we've got location 1, location 2. Obviously, if you did this and you only had 2 locations, you would have to take everything that's unclassified and assign them to a class, either location 1 and 2. And that's why it takes a little bit more work to assign a class to every transaction to really get that working. But just to get an idea of how the class tracking could work, you've got the location 1 and 2 now broken out by class, which will give you another kind of line item, which is nice because then you can look at, in essence, an income statement broken out by class, and you can collapse it to the totals running an income statement with no class if you want as well. So that's another way you can get more detail. So there's going to be those kind of rules. We'll get into some more bank feed rules in future presentations.